I just want to remind you that today, the third Sunday each month, is a different kind of a homily. It's a homily followed by a half hour of discussion and question and answers. And so the topic I've chosen for the homily today was something I originally intended doing in November, on the third Sunday in November. And then, as you realize, before that, I went back to Ireland because my mother was dying, so I didn't give it in November. And then the third Sunday in December was just before Christmas, and I didn't feel it appropriate to deflect any energy from Christmas. So I intended giving it on the third Sunday in January. And then on the third Sunday of January, we had the memorial service for Sherry Wilkins. And so I felt that the focus needed to be on that. So the homily I give today was something I intended giving about 3 months ago. So the gospel reading is from Matthew. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, because they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a single finger to move them. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those who want to try. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. And when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you yourselves are. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint and dill and cumin, but you have neglected the most important matters of the law, justice and mercy and compassion. You blind guides! You strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous, and you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves. You are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. Gospel inspired by God. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, and I don't know if I've got it backwards or forwards, that art imitates life. Yeah, did I get it right? Or backwards? Okay. So it gets very interesting when art imitates, when life imitates art sometimes as well. So when life imitates good art, it's very interesting. And when life imitates bad art, it's even more interesting. I'm going to give you 2 examples because you can check it out for yourself in the history books. But if you haven't heard it before and you saw it as a movie, you wouldn't believe it. It wouldn't even be a B-rated movie. You wouldn't believe such stuff actually happens. There was a character who between 1032 and 1048 was elected Pope 3 times. A guy called Benedict IX. And here's the story. He was still a teenager when he was elected for the first time, and he was elected because his uncle had been a pope before him. So it's a little bit of nepotism. He's elected still as a teenager as a pope, and he chooses the name Benedict IX. And he's a pope for 2 or 3 years, and then he's still a young man, he's in his very early 20s. He fell in love with his own first cousin. So he consulted his confessor, who was another uncle of his, and he said, can I resign from the papacy and still have some privileges? And the guy told him, you could. So he made a deal. He would resign from the papacy in order to marry his first cousin, but he would still be paid every year Peter's pence from England You know what Peter's Pence is? Peter's Pence is a special collection taken up all over the world every year for the Pope himself. And he insisted that he be given Peter's Pence in perpetuity, even though he was no longer going to be Pope. So that was the agreement. So he resigned from the papacy, and he went off to woo his first cousin. But she wasn't interested. You think he'd have checked it out first. She wasn't interested. She rebuffed him. So now he's not Pope any longer. He's getting Peter's Pence, but he can't marry this girl. So he's getting really, really upset. In the meantime, the confessor, the uncle who had advised him to resign, got himself elected as Pope. So he's got a problem. His uncle is now Pope in his stead. But it didn't deter him for too long, because he got an army and he overthrew his uncle and he deposed him. I kid you not. And he got himself elected Pope for the second time, and he kept the same name, Benedict IX. And he was so outrageous that after about 4 or 5 years, he was so immoral and so outrageous that the people of Rome finally threw him out. They didn't want him as their bishop anymore. And so he's gone for the second time. And then he raises an army, and he came back, and he attacked Rome, and he got himself elected Pope for the third time. And he liked the name, Benedict IX, so he kept it again. And finally, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was a German at the time, came in and deposed him. And he was out finally at that stage. Now, talk about life imitating bad art. I mean, if you saw that as a movie and you didn't know it was historical, you wouldn't, but you think it was really, really bad theater. A little bit before that, there was another pope, and I can't quite remember what the number was. He was called Stephen. I think it may have been Stephen VII, but I'm not certain on that piece. But Stephen was regarded, when he was a pope, he was regarded as a heretic. So when he finally died and he was succeeded by somebody else and he's buried, they decided to hold a heresy trial. So they disinterred the body, dressed him in full pontificals, propped him up against the sedilia, got a deacon to stand behind him to answer on his behalf, and they held a heresy trial. And they found him guilty. And so they cut off the 2 fingers with which he was to give the Urbi et Orbi blessing. They cut off the 2 fingers, and they dumped the body in the Tiber. But some of his followers rescued the body and they buried it. So the Pope who done that died. Another guy came and he decided that he needed to be tried again. So they disinterred the body for a second time. You can imagine the state of the body at this stage. I don't know if talcum powder had been invented or not at this stage. But they prop him up against the seat again, and the deacon stands behind him, and they hold a second heresy trial, and he's found guilty again. And now he's only 2 fingers left. So they take those 2 fingers off, and he's thrown into the Tiber again. And he got caught in fishermen's nets, which gives a whole new meaning to what Jesus allegedly said to Peter. Thou art Peter, I will make you be a fisher of men. They fish him out of the Tiber again, and he's interred for the 3rd time. So life imitating really, really bad art. That's where I want to start today. I'm going to make just 3 main points this morning. The first one I will call, and I'll admit it, a very brief and a very biased history of the Roman Catholic Church. Second one, I will talk about my history around reincarnation. And then thirdly, I want to say a small autobiography of the history of this incarnation for me. The other 3 points I'll make this morning. So the first one is a very brief and a very biased history of the Catholic Church. Now, as I've studied religious evolution, I see that all religions suffer from the same kinds of stages. That inevitably, the first stage is you get a really charismatic avatar, a Jesus figure or a Buddha figure or a Muhammad figure, somebody, a really charismatic character who comes down and shakes up the whole container and shakes up the entire culture and shakes up the whole paradigm. And they're very attractive characters always. They're really charismatic individuals, and very, very quickly they get a following. But mostly, the followers have no idea what they're about, because each one of us can only unpack any discipline according to the extent of our own knowledge and our own wisdom. No matter what you study it, whether you're studying quantum mechanics, or you're studying history or sociology or religion, every single one of us can only unpack it according to our own ability and our own knowledge. So the avatars are constantly surrounded by people who don't understand their message and can only make kind of exoteric interpretations of esoteric teachings. They will always reduce mysticism down merely into theology. So the disciples come, there's stage 2. Inevitably, the charismatic figure is killed, very, very often killed or gotten rid of in some stage. And then a community forms around the memory of the character. And very, very often, at this stage, they're going to reduce the teaching, the great mystical teaching, down to nuts and bolts and dead dogma that they can kind of understand and get their hands around. And so now the teaching has been eviscerated and they have what they can understand, and they're going to form an organization around this understanding. And they form the organization, and then either they'll appoint leaders or some people will self-appoint as leaders, and they'll take it over and they'll build a pyramid out of it. Where there used to be a community, inevitably there will be a pyramid, and there'll be some dude at the top, and there'll be a bunch of sycophants underneath him, and then the rest of us will be down there someplace. And then the persecution begins. And it'll start inside and start outside. We'll persecute those outside if we have the power to do it, and we'll persecute those inside if we have the inclination to do it. And then at some stage, it gets so top-heavy and so brutal that some other charismatic character comes, some new avatar arrives, and the cycle starts again. Now, it's not just going around in circles. It's more a spiral. There is an evolutionary trajectory to the process, but you go through the same cycle, and you go through the same stages inevitably. So if I were to apply this to the Roman Catholic Church, if I were to say in one statement what the history of the Roman Catholic Church is, I would say it's 300 years of persecution, followed by 1700 years of persecution. The first 300 years, they were the victims, and the next 1700 years, they were the perpetrators. And so for 300 years, this group is persecuted and trying to survive and trying to hold on to the memory of this great avatar called Jesus Christ. And mostly they're not getting it right. They're reducing it to dogma and to ritual. A few people will, of course. There'll always be the mystics throughout the ages who'll try to keep the flame alive. But basically, they won't. Most of them will just reduce it to dogma. And then in 312, when Constantine suddenly legalized the Catholic Church, now it's in a position to execute on its own behalf. So they'll follow 1700 more years of persecution, except they'll be the perpetrators in this instance. They'll immediately start burning sacred books of other groups. They'll try to destroy Mithraism, which was the big competitor at the time. They'll become hugely anti-Semitic, and they'll spend a lot of time killing the people from whom they originally were birthed, the Jesus people. They'll inveigh against those. From 1054 on, when there's a split in Christianity between the Greek Orthodox in the East and the Roman Catholics in the West, they will go to war with each other. And the first crusade will be launched in 1099, and they'll sweep across Europe, initially trying to destroy the Orthodox and kill them, and then the Jews, and then the Muslims, and anybody else in their stead. And there'll be a history of crusades for the next 200 years, until finally the Muslims will prove militarily superior, and they can't take back Jerusalem anymore. So then they'll come back, and they'll turn on themselves. They'll start the Holy Inquisition, and they'll start killing people within the organization. And then at some stage in 1492, every pope's dream, we discover the new world, which means there's a whole bunch of new people to be killed or converted, whichever you prefer. And we come across here and we decimate the Americas, reducing the population of the Americas from about 80 million to 10 million in the course of 100 years through disease and murder of all kinds. And then by 1870, the Pope has lost the Papal States, Pius IX. And in order to compensate his bruised ego, he declares himself infallible. And this is retroactive. And so this infallibility extends back to, presumably, Benedict IX, who was elected 3 times, and to Stephen, who was the heretic, presumably goes all the way back. Right up to our own time, 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, and we have this, what I call the slaughter of the innocents, the pedophilia, where the church will, as best they can, cover the institution, and instead of protecting the children, protect the perpetrators. Right up to the very top to our present Pope at the moment, part of the cover-up. So there's the very, very, very brief and very, very biased history of the Catholic Church. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I'm going to talk about my own history around reincarnation. When I went to ITP in 1987, in Christmas of 1987, I did a course which was called Pre- and Perinatal Work. And it was done by a lady called Barbara Findyson. And Barbara Van Dyson's theory was that the process of being birthed, the last few months in utero, and the birthing process itself are really significant factors in how people develop subsequently. Personality is very much an artifact of what the birthing process was like. And the idea was that you try to experience your own birth. So she would create a situation where you had a kind of a birth canal of pillows and particular kinds of music, and you had somebody sitting with you, and over a 3 or 4 hour period, you would see if you could re-experience your own birth process, so that you would get a handle on some of your own kind of personality quirks subsequently. And it was divided into 2 sections. A morning section in which one person got to be a sitter, looking after the person who was having the experience to make sure they didn't get into trouble, and you switched roles in the afternoon. This is really interesting to me. And so for the morning session, I was the sitter for another person who was experiencing this. And there were 23 of us in the class, totally. So it's basically 11-11. And I'm sitting for the morning watching this woman experiencing her own birth, and it was a really powerful experience for her. And everybody else seemed to be experiencing their own birth. And we switched in the afternoon, and I got the opportunity of experiencing my own birth. But something totally different happened. I'm expecting that I'll have an experience of being in Peg's womb and coming through the birth canal, and how difficult it might have been, or how easy it might have been, and how that subsequently reflected on the kind of personality I have. But I had a totally different experience. For 4 hours, I had the experience of being a young Tibetan girl giving birth to her firstborn. And literally, for 3 days after, literally, my belly and my thighs were sore. And I found it very difficult to make sense of this. I did not believe in reincarnation. Although I lived with the people in East Africa for 14 years who did believe in reincarnation, and I knew from my study of Celtic mythology that the Celts believed in reincarnation, but it didn't make any sense to me. As a Catholic priest, it didn't make any sense to me. So I was totally shocked by this really, really profound experience of giving birth to a child as a young Tibetan girl somewhere in the 1700s. So it was really, really interesting to me. Subsequently, over the 20 years in the interim, spontaneously in meditation sometimes, and on a few occasions in hypnosis, regressive hypnosis, I've recovered memories from 9 other lifetimes. And it's been fascinating to me. On one other occasion, I was a woman, a mother in England, and I had this image of just looking at my baby and being totally fascinated. This extraordinary eye contact between the child I had birthed and myself. But for 5 of those other 9 incarnations, I was either a priest, a monk, or a theologian. And there was a very interesting common theme that went through all of these 5. It was always, I started out being a very, very loyal son of the church, totally dedicated to the teaching of the institution, sometimes being really, really successful at it, but inevitably at some stage coming to the realization, as we say in Irish, tá rud ag an lofa stáit na dan bharige. Right, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. I always got to it somehow, at some stage of this, each of these 5 incarnations, something was not right. There was a huge miss between the teaching of the institution and what I understood to be the message and the invitation of Christ. And in each occasion, I began to articulate my doubts and to suffer the consequences of articulating my doubts, sometimes really severe consequences. In one of those 5 occasions, I backed down, and I decided it was more important, to be respected and to be part of the institution than to continue to speak out. The other 4 occasions, I spoke out, and I got punished appropriately. And so it feels to me like it's come full circle, that it's my experience this time. I've come to the same place in this incarnation, which brings me to my 3rd point. It's a kind of an autobiographical sketch of this incarnation around this particular incident. So I was born in 1946. I'm 2 months older than my youngest uncle. So I was born in October 1946. He was born in December 1946. And because we were so very, very close, my grandmother, his mother, wanted me to live with them. And so at age 6 months, I was taken from my own home, and I was raised with my uncle. So I'm separated from my mother at age 6 months, and I'm raised almost as a twin with my uncle Noel, whom I dearly, dearly, dearly love. But obviously, as a little 6-month-old baby, that's very, very traumatic, being separated from the mother. Then at age 6 years, I was given back. And so again, there's this real traumatic breach, because at this stage, this is my brother, and this is my mother. In fact, I called her Big Mammy. And this other woman who had given birth to me, Peg, I didn't know very well. I only met her occasionally. So it felt really traumatic at age 6 to be given back. So in my young psyche, obviously wasn't articulating this at the time, there was a real distrust of mother. How could you trust mother when you're given away twice at 6 months and at 6 years? And so I figured out there was only one mother that could really be trusted, and that was Mother Church. And so I became totally dedicated to Mother Church. Now I have 2 exemplars here from very, very different parts of the spectrum. My great-grandmother was a deeply religious Catholic woman, but she was a mystic. But she was totally convinced that the Catholic Church was the one true church. But within that tradition, she still managed a deeply mystical spirituality. The other side of the equation was a grandfather, my mother's father, who had been excommunicated twice in his life. Literally. He was excommunicated in the late 1919 because he was part of the IRA, which was fighting for Irish independence from the British. And the Bishop of Cork in 1920 decreed that anybody who took up arms against the British would be excommunicated. And he was excommunicated in 1920. And then again in the 1940s, he was working at this stage, and his best friend was a Protestant man called Sammy Porteous. And Sammy died. And my grandfather had the audacity to go into the Protestant church for the funeral service. And a few days later, the priest came down to the forge my grandfather worked in. He worked in a big forge making shovels. And he leant on off his horse and peered into this dark dungeon. And he said to him, "James Murphy, I have news for you. When you and I die, we're going to be going to different places." My grandfather said to him, "Canon McCarthy, that's a great relief to me." So we got excommunicated a second time. So I got these 2 models, a deeply, deeply committed Catholic woman who was a mystic, and a grandfather who was like a Celtic druid and who put friendship ahead of laws of the church. So I'm watching these 2 people as little kids and trying to integrate both of these insights for myself. But I'm convinced at this stage, obviously at an unconscious level, that the mother I can trust is Mother Mater Ecclesia, Mother Church. And so as a young boy, I'm totally connected and convinced that this is the truth. And so I'll dedicate my life to it. And at age 18, I entered the seminary. But before that, 1958, I had one upsetting event. I was visiting my grandmother in 1958 on the day that Pius XII died. And there was a radio announcer talking about the history of the papacy, and he made the statement, Pius XII was not one of the bad popes. I'm shocked. And I said to my grandmother, "What does he mean, bad popes?" And my grandmother said to him, "Whish, child, there's no such thing as a bad pope." I took her word for it. And then I got to the seminary at the age of 18, and I began to study church history. And I began to see, not quite right. There have been really, really bad popes. We had a professor of church history called Colm Cook, a brilliant, brilliant teacher who affected a very, very upper-class British accent. And an upper-class British accent always stutters. It's very high-class if you're British to stutter. So Colm came up with this brilliant statement. He said, talking about one of the popes, a guy called Alexander VI, one of the Borgias, he said, Alexander VI made many mistakes, one of whom was to subsequently succeed him to the papacy. So I began to see that there had been bad popes, but somehow I felt like this was an aberration. This wasn't really the true story. This was an aberration, and they were all infallible creatures. And I was totally convinced at that stage. I was going to dedicate my life to this institution. I was totally convinced it was the one true church. It was the only way to get to God. And I couldn't understand why all of the countries of the world wouldn't just appoint either a priest or a bishop to be the president of the country. And we would have immediate peace right throughout the world instantly. I was totally convinced of it as a young man in my 20s, early 20s, that if we only could elect a Catholic priest or a Catholic bishop to be the president of all 193 countries in the UN, there would be immediate peace in planet Earth. Totally convinced of it. And I got to Africa at age 26, And I'm convinced that this is the truth. I'm going to go to people who are living in darkness, and I'm going to bring the light of Christ and the light of the Catholic Church to them. I had barely landed in Nairobi airport on the 8th of November in 1972 when I got a real shock to my system. I began to realize two things. That the African people among whom I worked for 14 years were much more deeply spiritual than the people I'd left behind me, because their spirituality wasn't a question of just Sunday worship or keeping laws. It was a question of seeing God in everything. God was in the mountains and the streams and the trees and the cattle. God was vibrant. That's the first thing I saw. And the second thing I saw was the politics of Africa is really, really, really corrupt. Now, I think we're corrupt here. I think our politics is corrupt. But in Africa, it's more obvious because it's literally about food and water and shelter. And so I got in trouble constantly with politicians in Africa, opposing them on matters of injustice. And in 1986, because of a clash I had with the president of Kenya, who was from the area I worked in, I worked with his tribe, a tribe called the Tugan. I had 2 clashes with him, and after the second of them, I was given 48 hours to leave the country. And so I spent the next year in London, and my organization, my congregation, which is the St. Patrick's Missionary Society, they wanted me to go to Rome to study scripture, and I realized that my faith wasn't strong enough to survive Rome. So I refused to go. So I was sidelined to London for a year. And I used that time to study Jungian psychology and hypnosis. And then at the end of the year, I said to them, I want to go to California to study psychology. And they said, no, you either go to Rome or you go back to some other part of Africa. And so on the 23rd of June in 1987, I went back to London. I went to London Heathrow Airport, went up to the Pan Am desk, and I said, I had been accepted into ITP at that stage. Is there a flight going to San Francisco today? They said, there is. Are there any places on it? There are. Can I buy a ticket? I'd been told by ITP I needed $12,831 to survive for a year in the United States of America in order to pay my school fees and to live. And I got that money from my family. And so I arrived in San Francisco Airport at 2:30 p.m. on the 23rd of June, 1987. I had no idea where I was going to stay. I had one suitcase with a big rope tied around it, filled with books, and that was pretty much it. And I had no idea what was going to happen, except that they told me I needed to go to De Anza College for 2 months to have enough requirements to qualify for ITP, which I did. I finally managed to get into, I came to Palo Alto. You had just amalgamated 5 parishes at the time. So I lived in St. Albert's for a few years, and in return for working as a priest, they gave me board and they gave me keep. And I finished my time in ITP. I got a scholarship there the first year, which meant that my fees were divided in half, so I survived for 2 years. And then I began giving public lectures, and I generated some income, so I survived for 6 years until I finished my degree. And then at the end of that period, and many of you know this part of the history, I was thrown out of the diocese for my theology. And so we started an organization called the Thomas Merton Center, and many of you were members of that group. And at the end of 2 years, that divided because most of them, slightly more than half, there was a vote in which 106 people voted to go back to the church, and 100 of us voted not to go back. And we started Companions on the Journey on the 1st of June in 1997. And we've been part of that movement since. Now, over those years, my society in Ireland, they were really, really good. I mean, financially, I was totally on my own. But they could have made life much tougher for me, and they didn't. They didn't agree with what I was doing. They certainly didn't agree with my theology, but they gave me scope. But every 2 or 3 years, I'd get a letter appointing me someplace back in Africa. And each time I would say, I'm not going to accept it right now. Now, in the meantime, the year I'd been in London, on my 40th birthday, I wrote them a letter, and I said, I am dispensing myself from my vow of obedience. For the first 40 years of my life, I have followed the rules of my parents, my grandparents, the seminary authorities, the local bishop. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to live the rest of my life. I will only go where places that make my heart sing. I won't be in relationships or do any kind of work or accept any appointment where my heart is not going to sing there. So you can talk to me and tell me what your viewpoint is, but I'll make the decisions about my own life. So they kept sending me letters every 2 or 3 years, giving me an appointment. And each time I said, no, I'm not ready to accept an appointment. In 2007, I got a letter from them asking if they had started a counselling centre in London, would I go to London and head up that counselling centre. And I wrote back saying no. And then I realised this isn't really fair. These people are legally and canonically responsible for me. So for instance, if I did a criminal act, they'd be legally responsible. But they had no authority over me, they had no jurisdiction. So I felt this isn't fair. I can't expect them to be legally responsible while at the same time I'm being totally disobedient. So I wrote a long letter and I said, guys, I really appreciate you. You've really kind of cut me slack. You haven't agreed with what I'm doing, but you haven't made life difficult for me. And so I want to see is there some way where we can just lovingly dissolve our union so that you're not legally responsible for me, because I'm probably never going to go back and work for you again. And so they wrote back and said, yeah, let's do that. So when you come home to Ireland next year, let's meet and let's talk about it. So I went back to Ireland in the summer of 2007 and had a 3-day meeting, a really, really great meeting. And the Superior General, a guy called Seamus O'Neill, who was 2 years younger than me, said, let me investigate it. Let's see if we can just legally dissolve our agreement and do it really amicably. I said, great. So I came back to the States, and 3 months later I got a letter and he says, as you might expect, Sean, there's no problem actually legally dissolving our union, but canonically it can't be done. The Catholic Church will not allow us and you just to amicably separate. You're going to have to be dismissed. You can't leave, we can't agree to part, you have to be thrown out. I said, okay. So on what grounds would I be thrown out? And they quoted 2 canons. One was disobedience, and I said, yeah, that figures, I accept that. And the other one was loss of faith. You no longer believe what Rome teaches. So I said, that's true as well. And so I said, okay, under those circumstances, I agreed to dissolve my union with the St. Patrick's Missionary Society. So I heard nothing for 3 years. So I presumed I was no longer a member of Kiltegan. I'm still a Catholic priest. And then on the 4th of October in 2010, last year, I get a 2-page letter in Latin from Rome. And I took a while to process it. And I intended talking to you guys about it in November. And as I say, I had to go home to my mother was dying. Then December, the 3rd Sunday, was right before Christmas. And in January, it was Sherry's memorial, and I didn't want to be taking attention from that. And so it was a 2-page letter. I translated it, and I'm just going to read the introductory paragraph. I call it, Paul's letter to the Romans. I call this the Romans' letter to Sean. And I just accepted one paragraph. It came from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which until 1904 used to be called the Supreme Congregation of the Roman and Universal Inquisition. So it's just changed its name. Here's what it says. St. Patrick's Society for the Foreign Missions Ireland, Reverend Sean O'Leary, SPS, the 18th of June, 2010. It was written 18th of June. I only got it on the 4th of October. The Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, having heard a report from His Excellency, the Secretary of the Congregation, concerning the grave reason for dismissing the aforementioned priest of St. Patrick's Society for the Foreign Missions Ireland, has herewith given a final and irrevocable decision to which there is no recourse. He has decreed that for the good of the Church, the above-named priest should be dismissed from the Society of St. Patrick and removed from the clerical estate. That the priest is also granted a dispensation from all obligations connected with ordination and religious vows. So, as of June the 18th last year, according to them, I am no longer a priest. I got the letter on October the 4th, and I sat with it for a little bit, and it felt to me like it was like there had been a divorce. In a sense, we had lived apart for many, many years, myself and my wife. We've lived apart. But I finally get a letter, not telling me a divorce process has been initiated, and you have to give testimony. I was given a letter that said the divorce is complete, and the judgment has been made. You weren't called to give evidence, and the guy who sat in the tribunal was your wife's uncle, and they've made their decision, and you're out. And so I've been stripped of Catholic priesthood as of June the 18th of last year. Now, where does it leave me? It feels like I've come full circle again, that this is the 5th incarnation that I'm aware of, where I've come to a place where I start off as a really loyal son of the church, thinking this is my mother. I will dedicate my life so much to this group that I'll forego the possibility of a wife and a family because I'm so committed to this cause, to realize in my 40s and 50s and 60s that this is an extraordinarily corrupt organization and that I can't get behind this, that there's no way I can be part of an institution, that protects pedophiles, that creates inquisitions, that kills people in mass doses. I can't be part of that. And that my job is, I'm a priest because I came down to be a priest. I'm not a priest because some bishop ordained me at some stage. For me, that's just a symbol. I'm a priest because I'm a priest. I'm a priest because that's what I volunteered for in this incarnation. And my volunteering was to try to be an agent for the coming of Christ consciousness. And I've seen over the last few years, and you've certainly heard me talk about it often enough, that I realized years and years and years ago that Christ consciousness was not going to come about because of the Roman Catholic Church or any fundamentalist Christian sect or any fundamentalist organization. It would come about when little groups, cross-fertilizing Buddhism and Hinduism and Sufism maybe, people who had the flame of mysticism alive in their hearts, that this is how Christ consciousness would come. And that we needed a spirituality which would finally divorce itself from the institutions that are always aligned with power in order to be available for the inspiration of spirit itself, so that we could take very, very seriously our common brotherhood and sisterhood, that we're all one, we're all children of the same God, not just all the human beings on the planet, but all sentient life forms. And that our true mother is not the Roman Catholic Church or any institution, it is Gaia herself. It is this little planet that dedicated itself 4.6 billion years ago to creating species until finally it threw up a species that will be capable of recognizing its own divinity. And so I recognize just one mother at this stage. I recognize Mother Gaia, and I recognize only one Father, and that's the source who breathes life into all of his creation. So I'll open it up for questions, comments, remarks, discussion. Al.
It seems to me that in your presentation, the discussion about the church, there's a tendency for the church to look backward,
Okay.
whereas it seems to be very difficult to look forward.
Okay.
Human nature that compels us to think the good old days is
Okay.
what we need to get to,
Okay.
rather than the unknown.
That's brilliant. That's a great question, Al. So why is it that there's so much looking back? And I agree totally with you that institutions tend to drive by looking in the rear view mirror, instead of looking at the road ahead. Because I think all organizations, are afraid of evolution. Evolution involves the transfer of power and the empowering of individuals within the community rather than the appropriation of authority into just a little cohort at the top. So they're very much afraid of that. And fundamentalism, the essence of fundamentalism is two things. It is about reducing really, really complex ideas to a few basics that even the dumbest of us can understand, and then identifying a common enemy that we're unleashed upon. And so the actual word fundamentalism came into being in this country in the 1890s. After there had been a big controversy between science and spirituality, and the religious people were afraid that science was going to demolish religion. And in the 1920s and 26, particularly with the Scopes trial, when it seemed like science was in the ascendancy, these groups got really, really afraid. So there was a huge meeting of the mainstream Protestant sects in this country. And they sat down and said, guys, we have to bury the hatchet between us. We got to present a united front against science, or it's going to destroy us. So are there a few basics that we can all agree upon, a few fundamentals? And that's the origin of the word fundamentalism. And they said, yes, we can all agree that Jesus Christ is God's only Son. The Bible is the inerrant, infallible Word of God. There's only salvation through Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, and Jesus Christ died and rose again to forgive our sins. Can we all get behind that? Yes, we can all get behind that. Now, who's the enemy? Science is the enemy. And when you look at any fundamentalist organization, that's the essence. You take a really, really complex notion like spirituality or mysticism, and you reduce it down to a few dogmas, and then you identify an enemy, and you unleash the dogs on the enemy. And that's been the history of religion. that the enemy is always some other religious group, or some cases it's science. And it's always about consolidating present power and looking back to a founder whose teachings have been eviscerated and have been reduced down to dogmatic decrees. So I agree with you. You know, evolution is always about moving with spirit into the future. Patrice.
Sean, I'd like to thank you for a beautiful sermon. I'd also like to ask, why do you come back to this place again?
Okay, interesting. Okay. So Patrice's question is, why have I come back to this place again and again and again? Obviously, I haven't done it properly yet. I'm serious. Obviously, I haven't done it fully or properly yet. Or maybe, you know, part of me, the reason I stayed part of the Catholic Church for so long was I felt like I could be a better agent of change from within than from without. But it became obvious to me that at some stages I would be stifled by staying within. So one of my heroes, for instance, is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, this great Jesuit paleontologist, whom I regard as, I coined a word years ago called a mysticist. A mysticist is a mystic scientist, and I really believe that the spirituality of the future is going to be a cross-fertilization of science and spirituality, and that the truly enlightened beings are people who will be really au fait with good science and will be deeply mystical people. So I call them mysticists. And I believe that Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a mysticist. I only have one beef with him, that when he was silenced by the church, that he accepted being silenced. I think he could have done some extraordinary work if he'd had the courage to step outside the Jesuit system or step outside the Roman Catholic system and continue to preach, you know, his theory of evolution and point omega and Christ consciousness. He chose to accept the decree, and he was silenced for the latter part of his life. So at some stage in the 4 of the 5 incarnations that I've become aware of, I've come to a place where I felt I can't be in the system anymore and do what I need to do. But obviously, I haven't gotten it correct, and I don't know how I'll get it correct in this one or not. But I know that I can only do what I can do at this stage. And it may well be that maybe part of my volunteering and part of my contribution is, you know, to keep coming back into subsequent periods of human history and adding this as my contribution. Start with an organization, absorb what is of value in it, and then try to transcend it. Because for me, there's tremendous beauty in Roman Catholic liturgy particularly. I don't think anybody does liturgy or symbol or mythology like the Roman Catholic Church does. The theology sucks, but the mystery and the symbolism of our liturgy is beautiful.
Sean, like you, I grew up Catholic.
Okay.
Somehow, I'll start first and then
Okay.
Somewhere or another around my late teens, early 20s, I realized that the organizational structure was a structure like general, not the church. Part of this came, I don't know where it came from, anyway, but one of my brothers was approached to be molested, priest, I must have been about 14, 15, this is nuts. Okay. Then, later on, I came to believe this, that Jesus could have been just another guy, lost, made an impact on a few people, gone. And that wouldn't happen if they hadn't become organized. It's a dilemma.
Yes,
It's not
totally.
structure.
Yeah.
It's a dilemma.
Yeah.
If you want to exist, you need an organization. And it has to be. But I see that there's a spirit inside of this corrupt inherently. When you organize, you corrupt. Because you've created a hierarchy, you created status, you created power, and you created a collection of money. And people want that.
Yeah.
And then they identify their interests with the organization.
Totally.
To me, this is obvious. But the marvelous thing about the Catholic Church, maybe I'm considering myself Catholic, is that it is able to renew itself. A good example for me personally is John the 23rd, who went through the whole damn organization and came out John the 23rd. That says to me, the divinity of the church, whatever you want to call it, is verified by the fact that such a lousy, corrupt, hierarchical organization produced such saints throughout the century, such music, such beauty, such liturgy. That to me shows the divinity of the church. It's God speaking to human beings. We're all screwed up.
Great point, Mike. My response would be this. Did everybody hear what Mike was saying? It's the basically his core thesis is that it's the nature of organization to be corrupted. But still, in the middle of that corruption, there's the flame, there's the greatness that allows it to continue to survive. And that somehow this is an indicator of the presence of God within the system. I agree with that. However, I would use this example, and I've used it with you before. And it comes from my experience in Kenya of being involved a lot in water projects. I lived in the desert in Kenya for 14 years, and a lot of what I did was community development. And the provision of clean water was a vitally important part of that process. And I was involved with maybe 10, 15 different water projects over 14 years. And I've mentioned two of them particularly that failed dismally. Most of them were succeeded admirably. But in one case, we had piped water about 8 miles, a 2-year project, into a village and turned on the faucet ceremonially on the first morning, and no water came out. And we found out that a warrior from another tribe who didn't get the water project had only just traversed the length of the pipe, it was PVC piping, and just jabbed his spear in it every 5 or 6 paces. So the water was just lost. Another project in which we piped water for about 8 miles, and we had a ceremonial turning on of the tap after 2 years, and everybody danced and we drank the water, and 2 days later everybody was down with dysentery because the source of where we were taking the water from was polluted. And that became a great metaphor for me, that you need sound pipes and good water. Now the pipes represent the structure and the water represents the people, who staff the structure. So it feels to me that in order to deliver a quality product, you need good structure and you need good goods. You need good water. The water represents the people and the pipes represent the structure. And so the movement of evolution for me is always about the revamping and the dismantling of old structures and the creation of new structures, which are better structures, but they have to be staffed by people who are themselves committed to their own personal transformation. The best structures in the world, staffed by people who are corrupt, are going to deliver a poison product. And the best product in the world, trying to flow through a structure which is leaking, is not going to arrive at the consumer. So it has to be simultaneously. We have to be working in the world to dismantle evil political systems, wrong economic models, bad religious institutions, at the same time try to erect better organizations, but be committed always to the personal transformation so that the people who staff these new organizations or who head up these new economic models or these new politicians of ours, that they're people who are people of integrity. So I see the two pieces coming together. Lisa.
You've spoken many times about when it's the right time to kill the guru.
Okay.
And you've spoken about now looking at this series of events as the undisclosed divorce proceedings.
Okay.
You know about.
Yes.
What support do you need from us?
Okay. That's a great. And so Lisa's question is, what support do I need from you? I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to put this before you as soon as I became aware of it, but I wanted to do it in a format in which you had an opportunity to, interact, so that I wasn't just delivering a bombshell and then walking up and saying, let's do the offertory now. So I've had plenty of time to think about it, obviously. Also, I was happy that I went home to Ireland and I got an opportunity to tell this to my family first. And so we had several masses for my mother. And so the biggest fear I had actually at home was that I would arrive at the church on November the 20th to say my mother's mass, and I would be debarred. Somebody would say to me, sorry, we just got the news, you can't say the mass. That was my biggest fear. So for the 3 days before the mass, I was scared. I'm going to arrive at the church, there's 500 people there, and they're expecting me to say mass, and all of a sudden there's some stranger up there whom they don't know. Gratefully, that didn't happen. In fact, 6 of my fellow priests from Kiltegan, they showed up and they can celebrate with me, and they were really, really, really with me. It's an extraordinary organization. I then went down and I told my family. I had a mass just for my family, about 30 members, brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, grandnieces, grandnephews, stuff like that. And I told them pretty much the story I told you this morning, and they all started to clap, literally, to a person. They've known me well enough over the years to not be surprised by this. And so, what do I need from the congregation? I need for everybody, I suppose, to process this news in whatever way you need to do it. If for some of you this means that I can't be your spiritual director anymore, you're entitled to to take that position and to act accordingly. If this is not important to you in the sense that it doesn't in any way provide an obstacle to our togetherness, then that we will continue to be part of the same family. If you feel that it would be good for you to support the stance I've taken, I'd like to hear that from people. So I'm not going to put pressure on anybody to take any position on this. You have to honor your own integrity and see how does this resonate with you. Bill.
Sean, is your staff no longer a Catholic priest?
Yes.
Go, Sean!
I don't know if you can say this
Okay.
well, but it seems to me that this community has been working like a devil for the last year to create a community so that you can follow your vision. And that's the stance that we took when we said that we wanted you back. And I believe that that is the people who stay are absolutely committed to that. That this is not only your community, but it's our community that we can work together.
Thank you, Margaret. Yes.
I shared with Sean that when I was 33, I had a near-death experience. And with a,
Do you understand up?
when I was 33, I had a serious illness that was induced by antibiotics. And I spent 16 days in Good Samaritan Hospital in Las Vegas. And during that experience, I had an exchange with Jesus Christ. And a gold ball of light came in, and I was given the opportunity, because I followed both paths, to meet with Buddha or with Jesus. And I chose Jesus because Jesus was vacation Bible school when you're 5, and my whole upbringing had been in a Protestant church, in the United Methodist Church. And during that experience, one thing that came through very clearly among the many, many pieces of information I got in that near-death experience was that the church was just a container or a political construct that was placed over spirituality, but it really had not a great deal to do with spirituality. It was just, in fact, it contained it and constricted it. And this was in my exchange with a light being that I recognized as Jesus. I mean, it was so bright, I couldn't look into the light. And so the Catholic Church has just been maybe a container or a construct. And that's not, you're so much greater than that, and what you provide is so much greater than that. And politics should never hold dominion over spirituality. Because that's what we offer as a path, and not politics.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
I don't know how to explain
Yes.
this. Wrap this up. I was looking at Father, your retreat, Father, using the term Father.
Okay.
And that brought a lot to me, because all my life, I mean, as a Catholic, you're told that once you're ordained, it's forever. And most of us who are Catholic background believe that. We're here probably for some reason very similar to that. I see no reason to give that title up. And that's what I was.
Okay.
As a married woman, I decided to get a divorce, which was totally against everything I believed. And I have no problem signing my name if I want to. I don't. But that's my choice.
Okay. People here, Kathleen's is looking at this flyer here about the retreat, and just the title. That's 3-day retreat with Father Sean O'Leary, and saying that her understanding is that once a priest, always a priest, and that no group has the right to kind of take that away. And she talked about her own experience as a married woman deciding to get a divorce, although she came through a very, very strong Catholic background. But still, she will sign herself as Kathleen Lyons, her married name. So who has the authority to take, designations away from people? That's her response to it. Lee.
I'm a jack of all trades and master of none, Father Sean. But I was wondering whether we might, in this community, organize some sort of a dramatization that we, the people, grant to you, the spiritual leader, ordination on behalf of Gaia.
That's beautiful.
A question that I
That's
thought,
brilliant.
and if you'd like that, I'd be happy to.
So have you heard?
Help.
That's fascinating. Yeah, okay.
Well, I'll be the jack of all
It's your
trades.
turn.
I don't know if I can be the minister.
I've said to you many, many, many times, particularly since we founded, our community, that my notion of ministry is that there's a need in a community. There's a volunteer who either has the ability or is given the training, and there's a commissioning by the group to act on their behalf of the community in that capacity. And I've said to you many, many times, for me, whether that's a lector, a priest, a bishop, whatever it is, it's the community's need and the volunteering and the commissioning by the group that creates ordination or ministry. It's not some organization, halfway across the world who can give it or take it back. So that's a fascinating notion, Lee. Thank you. Mark.
Does this parting of the ways have any effect on your performing Catholic baptisms and or legal weddings?
Yes, absolutely. So the rest of the, which I didn't include today, there's a 2-page document and it's spelled out in grave detail. I may not give homilies, I may not say mass, I cannot do baptisms, I cannot do Catholic ceremonies. I can only hear confession in danger of death. I'm not allowed to teach in any Catholic institution. I'm not allowed to teach Catholic theology even in a non-Catholic institution, and to represent myself as, articulating Catholic viewpoints. My name is to be struck off the baptismal register in the church where I was baptized, indicating that he is no longer a priest of the Catholic Church, and the local bishop should have announced that this guy isn't the Catholic priest anymore, and don't whatever he says, don't listen. That hasn't happened to the best of my knowledge. I don't know. But any marriages I've done stand. And here's one piece which is interesting, that on the very day I got this, October the 4th last year, I just went online immediately, and I found an online site that ordained me, in the sense that I'm a recognized cleric by the United States of America to perform weddings and stuff. So I have just a legal document that makes it valid. Now for me, that ordination is it's a legal fiction, but it covers me for doing ordinations, for doing marriages and stuff like that.
You actually can do ordinations.
Well,
I presume you had been excommunicated years ago. In my mind, only liberated you to be my priest. No, that's what I had assumed.
Okay. I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm a slow learner. Okay. Brigitte.
Yes, I was just, the word liberated makes me think of, what about liberation theology? And the church, especially in Latin America, has had a very interesting role with a complete split between, almost complete, for instance in Nicaragua, between the official church, the hierarchy, and then the priests were on the side of the poor.
Totally.
And I don't think we should totally ignore them. Many of them pay
Yes.
high price.
Yes.
They
Yes.
were communicated, a
Okay.
few of them
Right.
got to keep their job.
Right.
But the church is not just one organization.
Right.
It has many levels.
Yes.
Do you want to comment?
Yes. You heard Brigitte's comment is that many levels, and the church in South America particularly, which has been under the influence of liberation theology, which has been condemned by Rome, has really espoused the cause of the poor and been really identified with the poor. I agree with you. So the interesting thing is who holds the power legally. When this pedophilia scandal really hit Ireland and really, really rocked Ireland really, really badly, there was a group of people, lawyers, who set up an organization online so that Catholics who were really, really upset with the Roman Catholic Church could go online, and they would lead them through a series of steps where they could literally defect from the Catholic Church. They could officially renounce their membership in the Catholic Church. And tens of thousands of Irish people visited that site and took advantage of it. Somebody sent me an email a few days ago, and I checked it out. The site has now been closed down because, you won't believe this, the Vatican has changed canon law so that you can't defect from the Catholic Church. Literally, you can only be thrown out. Literally. You can be excommunicated, but you can't defect. And so they closed. The site is up. There's a big notice across the screen that says, this site is ineffective because canon law has been changed, and you can't defect. You can't defect. You can be thrown out, but you can't defect. So is it?
Paper and ink.
Yes. Yeah.
That it doesn't mean
Right.
anything.
Right.
Either from our point of
Okay.
view or from their point of view.
Okay.
If you don't want to participate in church anymore,
Right.
you just don't.
Yeah, but
It's just stop you.
it's a numbers game. You know, Roman Catholicism is still the biggest religion in the world. We have about 1.3 billion members. Where Islam is catching up with us. So if we allow people to defect, we're going to be number 2. And that's not good. It doesn't look good on our record. So you can't defect. Yeah. Marge.
Do we not call you Father?
You never did, Margie. Why would you start now? I noticed. Okay. Titles are totally unimportant. They are totally unimportant.
I knew
Yeah.
that was important.
Absolutely not.
And I
Totally.
don't see you as father.
Okay.
Well, first of all, you're younger than I am.
Okay. Okay. Bill.
Are you a minister of the Universal Life Church?
I founded it.
I have too. I used to do temporary weddings just for 12 hours.
Did you preside over the divorce process at the end of the day?
Just for the weekend.
Just weekend. Okay. Good. Lisa.
Sean, I know that part of my daily practice, I like to do a meditation and to ask for God's will, that I can be a channel for it, and to have the circumstances arrive so that I can fulfill whatever that mission is. So I'm just looking at, you've been asking to do this mission, and they're setting you free to create what you can.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting. It's a great comment. I mean, my experience in this lifetime is crises that have proved really traumatic or upsetting at the time have always subsequently turned out to be liberating events. Once I have the courage just to see it for what it is, and so that I get to be more and more free, to be a conduit for spirit insofar as I understand it, and to have less and less kind of constraints by organizations that can tell me what to think and what to say.
But I think, again, in this community, that we have each other to witness each other's lives through these things. So I don't think it's an accident that we're going through this.
Yeah, together. Okay. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, guys.
Sean,
So, Jane.
I'm two things. One
Okay.
is, I'm like thinking of a new road now.
Okay.
Jane and I.
Oh, good. Okay. A new role or a new roadmap.
And the second thing,
Okay.
that, with all the radical structures falling apart in North Africa and the Middle East, with the ruling families, and maybe this is also part of that, leading the change into all kinds of patriarchal structures.
Yeah.
So we're just getting pulled along with the great change.
From your mouth to God's ear. Yeah. Sure. Margaret.
Sean, I feel like your family in Ireland, I'm not surprised, and I don't think it.
Okay, love. Okay. Okay, bye. Thank you. Okay. I was trying my best, Mara, but I couldn't speed it up. Patricia.
Tell us how you felt
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay. How did I feel at the moment? I was in a kind of a conundrum because my brother and his wife were visiting from Ireland the day I got the letter, and I didn't want to tell them about it until I had time to process it. So I'm trying to entertain those for 2 weeks until they went back to Ireland so they could kind of sit with it. And my initial impression was the divorce kind of metaphor was the one that came to mind. It was like, I knew we'd been living apart. I knew myself and my wife were separated, that it really isn't working out between us. But we can just kind of, go our parallel paths, honor each other, respect each other, and not have to be enemies. And so getting this was like, I wasn't served with papers and said you have to appear in court and kind of give evidence and justify and come to terms and decide on kind of custody of the children or, what alimony you're going to pay or whatever. None of that. That I got a document that said the hearing has taken place, a decision is reached, you're divorced, and moreover, the guy who presided, the presiding judge, was your wife's uncle. That was the sense, like I've been totally kind of just blindsided in this here. But as far as my membership of the organization, I've had very little respect for this organization for many, many years. But I've regarded myself as Catholic because, like Brigitte, it's like there's a difference between the family and the organization. As you said, Chris, the construct laid down on top of it. And so it would be like, suppose, for instance, my mother had disowned me and changed the lock on the door and said, you're not welcome in my house again. So there'd be a kind of a divorce between us as far as my ability to visit with her, but I would always be her child. I could not be her child. So in a sense, I can't not be a Catholic this lifetime, in the sense that this is my family. This was the religious lineage into which I chose to be born this time, and so I have a tremendous love for the Catholic family. I have a grave distrust of and distaste for the organization which has hijacked it. I see the Roman Catholic Church as hijacking a community in the same way that I feel that conservative politics have hijacked our country here and robbed us of our democracy. Our fundamentalist Christianity has hijacked the Bible and robbed us of our scriptures. And the rest of us are just backing away from the scriptures because it's contaminated stuff now. So I have the same feeling here that I have a tremendous love for the family, the Roman Catholic, not the Roman Catholic, the Catholic family into which I was born as a community, and no respect for the organization which has hijacked that community. Maureen.
Following up on that, I have a good friend who lives in the East, and she has two brothers who are Jesuits. And she came here, about 3 years ago to visit, and I took her to St. Mark's on Friday to hear Sean. And afterwards she said to me, and she's had priests in her family for years, I have never seen a priest say Mass with such reverence.
Would you say it for us now?
Okay. I would say for Maureen, because the Eucharist for me is the way that I connect to Spirit most directly and most frequently. And so I have extraordinary love for this great avatar, the Christ figure, and I think I understand him at a different level from what the Catholic hierarchy seem to get him, that they get him as a teacher and a judge, and I get him as a brother and as an exemplar, a mystical exemplar. So the opportunity to say Mass on a regular basis for me is a radically transformative experience. Yeah.
I think prophetic that a dead organization used a dead language.
Okay. Patricia.
Sean, first of all, I just applaud your integrity for being who you are and being true to your own path and your own theology, and that your this action that just happened just all the more confirms to me that this is where I need to be, and also kind of allays a little bit of the confusion that I've experienced in sort of defining exactly where I stand, and in sharing our community with other people, that it's a little more clear now that I feel like I can take not responsibility, but ownership for being here and espousing this theology and sharing that with us.
Okay. Thanks a million, Patricia. Carmen, sit.
What am I going to put on those questions that, whether they ask you what faith are you?
You say you're a member of the cosmic consciousness.
Christian.
Okay. Jojo.
Sean, I just want to say that congratulations on joining an amazing group of other phenomenal spiritual leaders that were in the Catholic Church that were asked to lead, like DeMello and so many others. And we had a sort of a saying in Washington, D.C. when I lived there, that you must be doing something right.
Thanks. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Eleven. Thank you, Pat. So can we now offer each other a sign of peace? Hug each other.